So, number one is focusing on weight loss. And I think for many people, this is a bit of a surprise, although I'm so grateful to say that less often, more people are beginning to recognize that this weight focus has been problematic. Personally, I feel that this is one of the most problematic things that takes place in health and wellness in general, and specifically in the workplace. So, when we think about the kinds of programs that we might be offering in the workplace, there's a broad range of examples of how weight loss focus shows up. So, maybe you've sponsored a Biggest Loser contest, or perhaps you bring Weight Watchers at work into the workplace, or employees are requesting that. And perhaps surprisingly, even our healthy lifestyle programs that are based on changing one's weight can be problematic as well. So, the other things that maybe we wouldn't think about that might lead to this weight focus would be sharing success stories in our newsletters or on our websites, or showing before and after posters, or photos. I remember when I was doing some workplace wellness for some medical offices, they were actually putting posters of successful losers up in their lobby, and they had these before and after photos. I always wonder what happens when people regain the weight. Do they have to do a before and an after photo? That never really happens, right? We see the after and we don't really consider the fact that maybe those are not sustainable changes for most people. So the problem that we get into is that there are really two flawed assumptions. So in the workplace, when we think about these assumptions about body weight, we see that these beliefs are so ingrained that only a small number, but fortunately a growing number of people will even question them. And so ask yourself, do you have one of these assumptions? The first being that in order to be optimally healthy, anyone with a body weight, a certain body weight, or a certain BMI above the ideal range should lose weight. So that's assumption number one. The second flawed assumption is that anyone who is really determined can lose weight and keep it off simply by eating less and exercising more. So, in other words, we kind of treat people like lab rats and end up putting them on this futile, endless treadmill, with this ideal that you've got to change the present body that you have. Now, the truth is that the evidence does not support these conclusions. If we are to be effective, we have to come to terms with the fact that these assumptions, however ingrained, simply aren't true. And again, this might be an area where you've suspected this. So the first reason that I think that these are so problematic is that weight is not a behavior. Health cannot be measured on a scale. And while all the time, money, and effort that we've devoted to weight management has been ineffective, we do know how to create sustainable changes in eating, physical activity, and self-care. These are meaningful behaviors that do make a difference. And you and I know how to help people do this, or at least we can learn how to do this. I think that focusing on weight is just a distraction from the differences that we can really make. The other thing that I really want to emphasize is that self-discipline and willpower have less to do with a person's body size and health than most people believe. It's a complicated issue, but it's important to recognize that weight is determined by a complex set of genetic, metabolic, physiological, cultural, social, and behavioral determinants that have a lot more to do with these interacting and sometimes unseen or unknown determinants than simply energy intake and output. And frankly, not all of these things are even within an individual's control. So, given this fact, unfortunately, there's a subtle and sometimes overt message that's perpetuated by health and wellness professionals that people who are naturally slim have greater self discipline and willpower, and that those are larger have less self-discipline and willpower. So I think that there's a lot that we could say about this totally inaccurate and harmful idea, but this is definitely not supported by the evidence. So here's another issue that I want to bring up, and I think this is, again, really problematic in the workplace. And that is that when we focus on weight, we are sending the message that thin bodies or smaller bodies are better than larger bodies, regardless of any health indicators. And so we really are perpetuating weight stigma. Further, we also are perpetuating the idea that healthy bodies are better than less healthy bodies. Now, hang on to that for a second, right? It's like, wait a minute, aren't healthy bodies better than less healthy bodies? Well, is that really fair? I mean, we know for a fact that we are not completely in control of our health. We all have family members and friends, or maybe even you yourself have had unexpected health consequences. Did that suddenly make you a bad person? And if a person's weight is not completely within their control anyway, not to mention the fact that so far we have not really had all of the ways of managing weight that people are reading on the internet. We've not had any evidence that those are really effective for most people anyway, long term. Yet we are perpetuating the othering of people. We're perpetuating the idea that other people are wrong and we're right, or we're better and they're not. And so here's the bottom line. Stigma is stigma, and it has no place in our culture, and it certainly has no place in our workplaces. So what do you do instead? I mean, how do we move from this to a more effective way of approaching these issues? Well, we're big on weight neutral around here at Am I Hungry? So what does this really mean? Well, it means that we do not position weight loss as the priority in our programs. There's a mountain of evidence indicating the ineffectiveness of traditional weight loss programs anyway, and growing evidence that they can actually be counterproductive and even harmful to our well-being and quality of life. And so instead, we recognize that health and quality of life come in all shapes and sizes. We cannot assume a person's health or health risk based on their weight or any kind of a number, and that everyone, regardless of size, can benefit from having a safe place to address decision-making skills and improve their behaviors that are positively going to impact their lives, regardless of whether or not it changes their weight. So what we know about this then is that when we shift to a weight neutral program, we are going to see sustainable improvements in physiological measures, for example, blood pressure. We're going to see improvements in health practices such as physical activity, and psychological issues such as self-esteem, because we know that weight loss programs often result in decreased self-esteem. We all think, oh, well, if you lose weight, your self-esteem will be better. Well, that's a very transient change. And when the weight comes back, as it does most of the time, then of course the self-esteem drops again. We also know that there's a high correlation between restrictive eating behaviors and weight loss behaviors and disordered eating. So if we can move to a weight neutral stance, we're also going to see some other important benefits in the workplace. For one thing, there's far less attrition than in weight focused programs. There are no adverse consequences. So these issues around increasing disordered eating and presenteeism, where there's this obsession with what I can and can't eat and what I weigh, that tends to decrease. And further, and I think, again, this is one of the most important issues, is that we avoid the stigma that is inherent in weight-based messages and interventions.